games, breakaway on Tuesdays, and learning from real-world practitioners at the Bush School. It's an honor to be back as a U.S. diplomat, representing the United States Department of State, and to introduce our Secretary momentarily. Many of you may not know about careers at State. Growing up, I certainly didn't know any Foreign Service officers, but I did have parents that instilled in me a desire to serve, mentors that expanded my view of the world, and a deep faith that taught me to care about my neighbor. And I have found a home at State. Let me give you a brief window into what our work entails. I started this adventure as a State Department intern and Robertson and Thomas R. Pickering Foreign Affairs Fellow. My first assignment took me to the border at the U.S. Consulate General in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. There, consular officers work to keep Americans safe by protecting and assisting them in Mexico. When our constituents land in jail, I visit them. When they lose a passport, we help. We facilitate adoptions and combat human trafficking. I brief congressional delegations about our bilateral relationship, and I, along with my colleagues' work, contributes to the economy by providing jobs and bringing investment back to America. But as a former Peace Corps volunteer, I am perhaps most proud of my work with the youth in Juarez. I regularly work with young student leaders through our programs with the goal of inspiring and empowering them to make a difference in their community on social, economic, and health issues. It is truly rewarding work and advances our diplomatic mission of creating a more secure, democratic, and prosperous world. U.S. diplomats are a beautiful reflection of America, a community of families, individuals, military reservists, and people all committed to public service. People with degrees in international affairs, law, nursing, creative writing. People like me, married to a Foreign Service officer and naval officer. People who were once like you, heard the call to serve, and are now in every corner, every stretch of the world, involved in the foreign affairs issues of our day. There is nothing like it. As the late President Bush once said, public service is a noble calling, and we need men and women of character like you to believe that you can make a difference in your community, your state, and your country. If what I've described resonates with you, consider joining us, for the State Department needs more people like us from our diverse communities with our unique perspectives on the world. And now, I will introduce a man that embodies that noble calling, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He has served his community as a church deacon and entrepreneur, his state as a congressman, and his country as an Army officer, and most recently, director of the CIA. I personally appreciate the work that he has done to communicate on all levels of the department about how our work is changing the world. He regularly sends us emails that he calls Miles with Mike about his travels and the mission that he's advancing. He also hosts frequent town halls with staff where he takes our questions. And now, this afternoon, near the one-year anniversary of his tenure, the Secretary is here to tell you more about our work as diplomats and why it matters to America. Will you please stand and join me in giving a true Aggie welcome to the United States Secretary of State, Michael Pompeo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jericho, for that kind introduction. Now, as the Secretary of State, we do diplomacy, which means you have to get the protocol right. So, howdy. It's great to be in Texas, one of the greatest countries in the world. You know, yeah, I just came back from South America, now Texas, and I'll return to the United States in the morning, yes. You know, seeing you all here reminds me of George Patton quote. He said, give me an army of West Point graduates and I'll win a battle. But if you give me a handful of Texas Aggies, I'll win a war. Now, that's tough to take from a West Point graduate. Look, I understand that this institution has sent more of its graduates into the military than any other university other than our military academies. It's because you all are tough, you're committed, and you want to serve. You should be proud of that, and I love it. And it's why I really wanted to be here today. I want to thank the Wiley family for making this series possible. You know, like Jessica said, everyone here, cadets, Bush School students, anyone looking to give back to America, should consider potentially one day working for the United States Department of State. Now, I know, I get it. Diplomacy doesn't sound as thrilling as firing anti-tank weapons, flying F-16s, crawling through the mud. There's no Top Gun version of the State Department. Instead, we get Madam Secretary. No offense to Tia Leone, those of you who are her fans. But there's a good reason that many former military officers end up working as diplomats, serving our country. It's because the work that we do is important for our soldiers. The soldiers need us, and we need them. Neither diplomacy nor the military can succeed at delivering for presidents and for our country without the other. And I'm not the first guy to figure this out. In 1946, President Truman was traveling. President Truman was traveling with Winston Churchill to Missouri, where Churchill would deliver his famous Iron Curtain speech. He delivered it there at Westminster at a local college. On the train, Truman showed Churchill a recent redesign of the presidential seal. The eagle's head was turned to the right, so it faced the talons holding olive branches. Now, that represented diplomacy. But rather than having the eagle turn to face the arrows, which represented war, Churchill pondered for a moment, and he said, you know, I think the head should be on a swivel, back and forth. In other words, diplomacy and military strength go hand in hand. They are indeed intimately related. Each relies on the other. You know, I saw this as a young Army captain way back in the 1980s when I patrolled that very Iron Curtain that Churchill spoke about. I had the incredible privilege, along with my fellow soldiers. We were there to deter the Soviets and indeed prepare this country for the worst. But ultimately, it wasn't our tanks that delivered that victory. It was diplomacy, backed by the credible threat of force that we had projected. You know, Aggies have a long history in the military, but you also have a long history serving America's diplomatic mission at the State Department, and I'd love that to continue. If you join us, if you work, it will make a difference in the life of every American. Now, I'm going to speak just for a couple more minutes because I want plenty of time to take your questions, but before I do, I want to talk briefly about three aspects of my life, of the State Department's work. First, it's an incredible element of promoting national security. As they did during the Cold War, diplomats build relationships to ensure that disagreements never boil over into military conflict. Take Jerica, you just heard from, and her team. They're talking to Mexican authorities to alleviate migrant crisis and to secure our border. Her colleagues are confronting the opioid crisis by encouraging partners to cut off the drug flow, that fentanyl that comes in the United States and wreaks so much destruction. Just a few months ago, we saw the announcement that China made that they would do their part to deny fentanyl access to our country. It was State Department's diplomats who sealed that deal. And farther from home, the state has helped grow the ranks of the Defeat ISIS coalition, an enormous victory. We've seized back 100% of the caliphate, liberating millions of Syrians. American diplomats were at the center of creating that coalition and reducing threats to our citizens. Just this morning, I spoke with our ambassador, who's working to bring peace in Afghanistan. There's another graduate of this fine institution, a young lady named Melissa. She's supporting our work there to broker peace between the Taliban and the Afghan government. We're trying to end the longest war in United States history and save the lives of Afghans and American soldiers alike. Or take a man named Steve Began, a truly remarkable fellow. He's one of my special reps. He's working on the North Korea file. His team has gotten an international coalition together to put the toughest sanctions in history on Chairman Kim Jong-un and his country. But Steve's work is also important in that we are keeping the door open, working to achieve a diplomatic outcome where North Korea will be denuclearized in a way that brings peace to the peninsula. You know, Steve and our team have gotten enormous results. I was privileged to be in North Korea, where Kim Dong-chol, Kim Hak-sung, and Tony Kim were able to climb on an American airplane and return home to their families from being held hostage in that country. A remarkable diplomatic achievement. Indeed, I'll never forget the very moment when they met their families on the tarmac. President Trump was there to greet them too. And I was thinking that morning, it was 3 a.m. Washington, D.C. time, about the amazing work that our team had done, not just that day, but in the weeks and months before that. Absent that great work, absent the work of people like you who decided to join the Department of State, that will still be held in the hands of the North Koreans. You know, the second thing we do every day at the State Department, people don't truly see directly. We make sure that our diplomacy impacts the American people by strengthening the United States economy. The truth is, we have to compete in a global economy. The United States business need access to markets all across the world. President Trump is determined to open those markets for our products. That's certainly true of companies and businesses here in Texas, where exports benefit your economy to the tune of $260 billion a year. It supports more than 900,000 Texas jobs. And we help. We help by supporting these economic opportunities through our diplomats. We work to open these markets with our some 1,600 economic officers stationed all across the world. We try to take down barriers. We try to make the case for American companies and why they can deliver true value to nations all across the world. Indeed, it's the case that there is seldom an engagement. I was in South America just before coming here today. Not a single one of my conversations, not in Chile, not in Peru or Paraguay or in Colombia, did we not miss the opportunity to make sure they understood that America was there prepared to help create value for their countries as well. You've seen it in the work we've done to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement. But you should know it's more than just commerce. There's a strategic element to this too. In Houston last month, I spoke to a group to talk about how energy impacts each and every one of us, how there is a national security component to America's capacity to deliver energy all around the world. We watch as a pipeline is being built in Europe, which will tether Germany to Russia in a way that is not good for German security or security of the United States of America. The work that's being done here in Texas and Kansas and Oklahoma, all of the energy fields, and in North Dakota, if done well, can work with our diplomacy to deliver true security, not only to America, but to Europe as well. And you should know, Aggies are also helping state create a program to transport excess natural gas from right here in Texas to the Dominican Republic, so it can be sold throughout the Caribbean. We want to make sure the lights are on for your next spring break. We've got another team. A team's working to warn our friends and partners against buying Chinese 5G technology and build out their infrastructure with Chinese equipment. These are companies like Huawei, which will take your private information and transfer it to the Chinese government. It makes no sense, and American diplomats are at the forefront of sharing this information with the world. None of us want our privacy, our freedom falling into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. The final thing before I close. The State Department helps with our American diplomats promoting and protecting our values, indeed our very way of life. The U.S. is the global standard bearer for democracy, for freedom, for liberty, and for human rights as well. If we don't speak up, no one else will. A few months back, the United States made the decision to leave the United Nations Human Rights Council. We did so because it had become under the control of authoritarians and dictators, people that didn't really care about human rights. We made the decision to move our embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing facts on the ground. And our diplomats are, even as we speak, all across the world promoting American values and human rights all across the globe. We're working on various missions, including making sure that the nature of Chinese Orwellian systems, particularly their clampdown on people of faith, are impacting us right here at home. You know, I recently had the privilege to meet with a group of Uyghur Muslims that came to my office. They talked about the systemic imprisonment They talked about oppression and even torture happening in parts of China today. This cannot be allowed to stand. We're exerting maximum pressure to change the very nature of the Islamic Republic of Iran, to make sure that that regime simply behaves like a normal country and does not spread terror throughout the world. Today, as we stand here, Iran is engaged in conducting an assassination campaign throughout Europe. Our diplomats are working to push back against them so this will stop. And my most recent trip was part of the effort that's being led by the Organization for American States and the Lima groups as we work to restore human rights and democracy in Venezuela. I know that we will ultimately be successful and that Mr. Maduro will leave that country. You know, our diplomats also go on offense to promote American values, in part simply by building and maintaining a set of relationships that are centrally important to our country. These deep friendships matter as time moves on. Jerica mentioned some of the work that she does with the youth in Ciudad Juarez. That's a long-term investment in our relationship with our partners to the south in Mexico. We trust that the young people that she's working with will come to understand America, that they will come to understand how much we care about them. And when it's their time to lead, they will become good partners for our great nation. You know, we do something different on a truly national scale as well with foreign aid. We provide assistance to countries like no other country in the world. Our goal is often to turn struggling nations into strong, long-term partners, democratic partners for the United States. And in times of crisis, when we've offered a hand, I can tell you that people like Melissa, the former Aggie stationed there in Afghanistan today, will benefit from the American aid which we've provided to that country. You know, about 4 years ago, Melissa was in a tour in Nepal when a devastating earthquake hit that country, killing nearly 9,000 people. She said it was one of her proudest moments as an American diplomat. She watched as the embassy rallied to the people's side, allowing those in need to come seek services at our embassy, to shower and to seek food and shelter at the American embassy. You know, for her next tour, she went to Kabul. And just moments after she landed, another earthquake. Everyone in the airport thought it was an explosion, but she knew. She'd been through this before. She next traveled to Mexico City. The year was 2017. You'll all remember. It was one of the most devastating earthquakes to hit Mexico City in decades. And Melissa saw the great work that the embassy did to make sure that the people of Mexico City got back on their feet. I made sure that Melissa did not come to visit with us today. She will tell you that as a diplomat, there was nothing more rewarding than watching American excellence, American graciousness, American resources and power to meet and help people in times of adversity. This is the life of an American diplomat, and a noble undertaking and one of true public service. You know, there's a story. It's about President Reagan's Secretary of State, Secretary George Shultz. He understood diplomacy. He would meet with our ambassadors as they went to the field. He would ask every ambassador who came by his office just before they went out for their first assignment. He would give them a pop quiz. He would take them over to the side of his room. He would point them to a globe, and he would ask them, he would say, now that you've been confirmed by the United Senate, point to the country that you now represent. And they'd all fail, because they'd point to the country which they were leaving. Indeed, the correct place to point for every one of our diplomats is their service to the United States of America. Secretary of State Shultz knew that. President Reagan knows that. President Trump and I know that too. I know that you all have a tremendous sense of duty, a tremendous sense of service. I hope that today you can see that America's State Department is committed to living up to those standards. And if our mission appeals to you after your time serving elsewhere, we would love to have you come be part of our team. Thank you all for letting me be here today. Thank you for allowing me to be with you. Good luck, God bless you, and I look forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. Well, welcome to Aggie Land.
It's great to be here.
I wanted to start first by asking about, if there are some young people in the crowd that really did hear that call to serve. What are the steps they should take in order to join the State Department and make a difference in the world?
So team standing right in the back, on your way out, we'll sign you up. So there's lots of different ways to serve at the State Department. We have folks from all different backgrounds, engineers, event planners, speech writing teams, all the skills that the Lord gives different people. You can go take a look on our website. And then for those who want to make a career working in the Foreign Service, it's to study hard and prepare for the Foreign Service exam. And then the process is pretty straightforward from there.
Okay, great. As we sort of look towards the future, how does the State Department meet the technological challenges that the 21st century presents?
So there's two things as we look forward that I think are absolutely paramount. As Jerica said, I'm now two weeks short of being Secretary of State for 1 full year. There's two things as I stare at the State Department to make sure that we're ready for the 21st century. One of them is what you identified. We need the capacity to move at the speed of our adversaries. They move quickly, whether that's Al-Qaeda or ISIS or the Russians or the Cubans. They make decisions quickly. None of those are democracy with all the process that's attached to that. And I wouldn't trade it for a world. Don't confuse. But we have to make sure that American diplomacy can move at that speed. There's an information component to that. There's a technology component to that. And there's places that we have real work to do. The second thing we need, and by the way, that space, that information management space, we saw this with the Russian efforts to impact our elections. We see this in the information space in Iran today. That information space is an incredibly important component of being able to deliver the American message around the world in ways that it wasn't 20 or 30 years ago. The capacity for cheap, simple information readily available on your handset is different and presents a different information challenge for us. And we need to make sure that we're sitting there right on people's handset, sharing the American message in the same way that our adversaries want to share in those countries as well. The second piece is cultural, inside an institution. I have run a tank platoon. I was an executive officer in a cavalry troop. I ran 2 small businesses, then was the director of the CIA, and now I'm running the State Department. Every organization has to have an ethos, a central mission set that is clearly understood so that every single officer of the State Department understands the commander's intent. And so we're working to build out life cycle training programs and making sure that the ethos of the 21st century diplomat, the commitments that I spoke about in my remarks, are at the forefront of every officer's mind. So when you get to a place and you get to a time when there's a decision to be made, and perhaps the guidance isn't detailed sufficiently, you'll have the principles, you'll have the core understanding of what it is the expectations are for American diplomats, and you'll make a really good decision. I'm confident that we're in a good place there, but there's always more that can be done.
Great. Our campus is so excited to welcome you here today, and in the lead up to today, we gave the community the opportunity to submit some questions, and Wiley has gathered some of those great submissions, and so now I'd like to turn to our audience for some more questions. Can you please stand?
Howdy.
Hi. Howdy. I get it right. Yeah, I got it.
Good job. Good job.
I'm from Kansas. I get it all. Go. I figured it out.
So my name is Riley Farrell. I'm a sophomore here, and I have a question for you. Here at Texas A&M, we have a very strong tie to the military, which is very similar to your alum, West Point. How has this exposure to military culture when you were younger shaped your perceptions of diplomacy?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. You do have that same culture here for sure. Throughout the whole institution, the commitment to duty and service permeates this institution in the same way it did the place that I did my undergraduate time. I will tell you the other thing that I really took away from my time as a young officer in the military that I think is of enormous value in my current role, and I ask all of our diplomats to do this, which is to listen. I remember, I've told this story before, there's a E7 named Sergeant First Class Pretry When I was a young second lieutenant, I went to my first assignment. I got out of what was an M151 Jeep. Very few of you would remember these. And I climbed out, and I walked over to him, and I had my gold bar, and I'd been commissioned for all of, 90 days or 120 days. And I walked up to Sergeant Petrie, and he saluted and said, young man, you'll do well if you just shut up for a while. He was right. I was also afraid of him, so it all worked. The capacity to understand, the capacity to listen in the military is critical. To listen to your soldiers, to make sure you understand, to listen to your commander so you understand exactly what it is they're trying to get at. The same thing is here. I spend a great deal of my time talking, engaged with my counterparts around the world. I was with Chilean President Piñera a few days back, right? I wanted to not only hear him, to hear what he'd said, the things he had on his mind, but to listen in a way to try and comprehend what it was he really wanted and how our two countries could work best together. If he said, what's the one thing that I remember from my time in service? I learned a lot about leadership, but one of the things I truly did come to appreciate was the value of listening and taking on board the ideas of others so that you can execute the mission more effectively. I hope all of the folks who work here at the State Department take that lesson on board as well. Thank you
so much for your answer and for joining us here in Ivy Land.
Thank you, Riley.
Hi, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Yanira Garcia. I'm a third-year PhD student. My question to you is, how does the State Department handle time-sensitive issues such as the humanitarian crisis currently gripping Venezuela? Thank you.
So you have a big government, and that means sometimes we don't move just as fast as we need to. The great news is when a crisis breaks, we're good. We're very effective. So we have a group that is called the USAID. They provide aid and assistance, usually medicine and food. And literally, within a handful of days of the recognition that the crisis, the humanitarian element of the crisis in Venezuela had spiraled, it had spiked, it had been difficult. This has been years in the making, but it had taken a step change in the wrong direction. We were able to move not only food and medicine, but water. We were able to mobilize airlift from our military, C-17s flying to, I flew in here from Cucuta, Colombia, to take it to the border. The American people are enormously generous. Still sitting, I walked through the warehouse where there's still food and medicine sitting. We can't always get it, as in the case of Venezuela. We weren't able to get it to the people who needed it. Maduro is still denying food to the starving and medicine to sick children.